I thought I'd found my art style, but I was just completely wrong. I've realised that I need to completely rethink my art style and approach. And I don't mean just changing a few colours, buying some new brushes, drawing faces slightly differently. I mean genuinely questioning what makes my artwork mine. Because recently, a major gallery got back to me about some concepts that I'd submitted, and the feedback was that my work was still too visually similar to another established artist that they work with very closely. And that hit kind of harder than what I expected. Not because I think the comparison is insulting. The artist is incredible. The problem is, I've heard this comparison for years, and I genuinely thought I'd kind of moved away from it all. When I first started hearing that comparison, I kind of understood it. There were similarities in the subject matter that we both drew. The line work, the way I use colour, the heavy contrast, the cinematic compositions. But over the years, I've deliberately tried to develop away from that and some of those things. My work has changed, my rendering's changed, and my compositions have changed. So in my head, I'd already solved that problem. But apparently, not as much as what I thought. And that is uncomfortable to sit in, if I'm being honest. Because there's a massive difference between thinking your work has become distinctive and having somebody outside your bubble look at it and say, I can still see somebody else in that. That forced me to ask a question that I haven't properly asked myself in years. What does my work actually say that belongs to specifically me? Not what brushes do I use, and not what colors do I like, and not how do I render fire, faces, or lighting. What is actually underneath all that? Because I don't want the solution to be, fine, I'll just make my line work different, because that just feels too superficial. And honestly, if changing a brush is enough to completely reinvent your artistic identity, you probably didn't have much of an identity there to begin with. What I want is work where somebody sees it and doesn't need to ask who influenced it. Not because it looks unlike anything that's ever existed before. I don't think that's realistic. Every artist comes from somewhere. We absorb films, we absorb comics, video games, different artists, illustrators, photographers, music even, and pretty much everything. But eventually, those influences have to pass through enough of you that the result becomes something else. And I'm not convinced that I've pushed that far enough yet. And weirdly, I think this has happened at exactly the right point in time, because artists now have another problem. AI can imitate the surface of an art style frighteningly quickly. Color palettes, lighting, brush texture, rendering habits, compositions, genre, aesthetics. Give it enough visual reference and it can produce something that, at a glance, contains a lot of the same ingredients. And I think that raises an uncomfortable question for artists. If your entire artistic identity can be described as, I use this type of line, this color palette, and this lighting, then how much of that identity is actually protected by being uniquely yours? Now, I'm not saying there is some magical style AI could never imitate. That would just be naive. What I am saying is that maybe the things we're pushing harder are now the things that exist below the surface of style. And this is where I realized I might have been asking the wrong question for years. I always thought developing an art style meant deciding how I draw. Maybe it's actually about deciding what I repeatedly have to say. What subjects keep pulling me back? What emotions arise from that? What symbols do I want to include? And what kinds of people? What do I exaggerate? And what do I leave uncomfortable? And what do I deliberately refuse to polish? I want it to be clear that what appears in my work actually means something to me, rather than because I know it just looks cinematic and cool. That feels much more interesting to me, because two artists can use similar brushes, they can use similar colors, they can even have similar rendering ability, but they shouldn't have exactly the same obsessions. And I think that means my work probably needs to be a little bit messier, maybe significantly more messier. For years, I've spent an enormous amount of time learning how to make an image feel finished, such as cleaning edges, controlling the lighting perfectly, polishing and rendering, removing mistakes, making everything feel deliberate and controlled. And obviously, I'm not suddenly going to forget how to draw, but I'm becoming increasingly interested in what happens if I stop cleaning away every trace of the process, such as more texture, more visible marks, more distortion, more symbolism, less obsession with making everything conventionally beautiful. Maybe even leaving things in the image that the version of me from a few years ago would have immediately fixed. Keep those mistakes in, because sometimes perfection removes evidence that a human being actually struggled with the process. And I don't mean manufacturing fake imperfection, because that can just look trendy. That would just become another style trick. I mean allowing a decision to remain rough because rough is more emotionally truthful. Allowing an awkward mark to stay because correcting it might make the drawing cleaner, but ultimately kind of weaker. There is also a genuinely frightening part in doing this. My art style works. Clients hire me for it. I know how to produce it. I know roughly what a finished Sam Mail illustration is supposed to look like. And there is security in that. And if I start deliberately breaking some of those habits, I might make worse artwork for a while. And that is probably inevitable, because when you're already technically comfortable, experimentation can feel like regression in a way. Suddenly something doesn't work. You don't know which brush to use, the color feels wrong, the composition feels strange, and your first instinct is to retreat back towards the thing that you already know how to do. But maybe becoming worse for a while is the price of becoming more yourself later, and that is the bit that I'm trying to accept. And to be clear, I don't hate the work that I've created. I'm proud of it. This isn't me declaring that everything that I've made before today is a failure, because that would just be ridiculous. All of this work got me here. It taught me how to compose an image, how to use color, how to work professionally, and how to communicate ideas, and how to actually finish a piece of artwork. But maybe style becomes dangerous when it stops being the result of experimentation and starts becoming a set of habits you repeat because you know they work. At that point, you're not necessarily developing a style anymore. You're just maintaining one. And I think I've reached the point where maintenance just isn't enough anymore. And the strange thing is, I don't actually know what the new work is actually going to look like. And for once, I think that's the point. I want to experiment publicly. I want to make work that might fail. I want to try compositions I would normally reject. I want to push subject matter further. I want more symbolism in the work that I create. I want more of my personality to shine through. More uncomfortable decisions, more evidence that a person made this thing. And I want to find out what remains when I stop trying to make everything look like a finished Sam Mail illustration. Because maybe an art style isn't something that you eventually find and then just protect forever. Maybe it's what survives after you stop copying your own habits, if that makes sense. So no, I don't think I'm abandoning my art style. I think I'm finally testing which parts of it were actually mine. And I genuinely don't know where this is going to lead me. But that makes me more excited about making art than having another perfectly predictable finished piece ever could. So if you're an artist, I'd genuinely be interested to know whether you've ever had a piece of feedback that forced you to question the direction of your own work. And if you want to follow this experiment as I start actually making these changes, please subscribe, because I'm going to show you the successes and the things that just completely fail. And if you are trying to build a professional career around your artwork, I also wrote The Profitable Artist, covering portfolios, positioning, pricing, clients, and creative income. And the link to that is in the description below. I thought I needed to find my style. Maybe what I actually needed was to stop being so comfortable with it. And on that note, thank you for watching.